The glass tipped. Water splashed across the woman's $5,000 Birkin bag. And Aaliyah Thompson's life shattered right along with it. "You're worthless." The woman's voice cut through the diner like a blade. "Crawl for it." She threw $300 bills on the floor at Aaliyah's feet. "Show everyone what you're really worth." Aaliyah stood frozen, tears burning behind her eyes, every patron in the diner watching her humiliation under those harsh fluorescent lights. Her hands trembled. Her heart pounded. This was it, the moment everything she'd worked for, everything she'd sacrificed for her dying sister, came crashing down. The door chimed. A man in a baseball cap stepped inside. Aaliyah looked up, recognizing him instantly. Alex, the regular customer she'd been secretly falling for over the past 3 months. The man who didn't know she existed beyond coffee refills and small talk. But when his eyes landed on the scene, something shifted. His jaw clenched. His fists tightened. And the look in his eyes, pure unfiltered rage, made Aaliyah's breath catch. Because that wasn't the look of a struggling freelance writer witnessing injustice. That was the look of a man who owned the world and was about to burn it down. He took a step toward the woman, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "What did you just say to her?" And in that moment, Aaliyah realized she didn't know this man at all. She had no idea who Alex really was, why he'd been coming to this rundown diner for months, or why he was looking at her like she was the only person in the room that mattered. But she was about to find out. And it would change everything. Welcome to Mr. Harrington's Stories, where love, power, and secrets collide in the most unexpected ways. May your week be filled with unexpected blessings and the courage to stand up for what's right. If you're here right now, type present in the comments. Let me know you're riding this journey with me. And listen, if you believe that no one, and I mean no one, should be humiliated for doing their job, hit that subscribe button right now. The trolls won't. Be better than them. Now, let's dive into a story that will wreck you in the best way possible. The alarm shrieked at 5:30 in the morning, cutting through the silence of the cramped Chicago apartment like a blade. Aaliyah Thompson's hand shot out from beneath the thin comforter, silencing it with practiced precision. She didn't need the extra seconds of sleep anyway. Sleep was a luxury reserved for people whose lives didn't hang by a thread. She sat up slowly, her body protesting every movement. 28 years old and already her joints felt decades older, worn down by double shifts and the weight of responsibilities that should have been shared but never were. The bedroom was barely large enough for her twin bed and a rickety dresser, the walls painted a dull beige that had faded to something resembling surrender. Through the paper-thin wall, she could hear Maya's shallow breathing in the adjacent room. Good. Her sister was still asleep, still resting, still fighting whatever mysterious illness had been slowly stealing her strength for the past 6 months. Aaliyah stood, her bare feet meeting the cold linoleum floor, and padded to the bathroom they shared. The mirror reflected back a woman who looked both younger and older than her years. Her ebony skin still held that natural glow, even under the harsh fluorescent bulb that flickered overhead. Her dark eyes, warm and expressive, carried stories most people would never see. High cheekbones, full lips, tight curls that defied taming even when pulled back into the practical ponytail she wore for work. Beautiful, yes, but beauty didn't pay bills. Beauty didn't cure illness. Beauty didn't bring back parents who died too young or erase the burden of becoming a mother figure at 16. She splashed cold water on her face, avoiding her own gaze. Looking too long in mirrors had a way of making the cracks visible, and she couldn't afford to crack. Not today. Not ever. The kitchen was no bigger than a closet, but Aaliyah moved through it with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to make much from little. Instant coffee because the good stuff was a luxury. Toast because it was cheap. She'd skip breakfast herself, save it for Maya who needed the calories more, who needed every bit of strength to make it through her classes at Northwestern. Northwestern. The word still felt surreal, a dream Aaliyah had manifested through sheer force of will and endless sacrifice. She glanced at the stack of bills on the counter, held down by a coffee mug that read World's Best Sister, a gift from Maya 3 Christmases ago. Medical bills, tuition statements, rent notices. Numbers that blurred together into one suffocating total. Aaliyah had stopped adding them up months ago. What was the point? The math never worked in her favor. Beneath the bills, hidden like contraband, was her sketchbook. She pulled it out, just for a moment, just to remember. Page after page of fashion designs, dresses and blazers and coats that existed nowhere but in her imagination. Elegant lines, bold patterns, pieces that married African prints with contemporary cuts. This was the dream she'd buried when her parents' car spun out on black ice 12 years ago, when the police officer knocked on their door with that look in his eyes, when suddenly she was 16 and responsible for a 7-year-old with her mother's smile and her father's gentle heart. "I gave up my dreams so she could chase hers," Aaliyah whispered to the empty kitchen. "That's what family does." She closed the sketchbook and shoved it back under the bills, burying it where it belonged. By 6:15, she was dressed in her diner uniform, black pants, white button-down shirt, sensible shoes that still somehow destroyed her feet by hour 10. She checked on Maya one last time before leaving. Her sister was curled up under a mountain of blankets, her breathing still shallow but steady. 19 years old and so brilliant it hurt, studying pre-med because she wanted to understand her own body's betrayal, because she wanted to help others the way no one had been able to help her. The doctors called it an autoimmune condition, rare and aggressive, the kind that required specialists and treatments insurance barely touched. Aaliyah pressed a kiss to Maya's forehead, careful not to wake her, and slipped out into the pre-dawn darkness. The diner was a 20-minute bus ride followed by a 10-minute walk, giving Aaliyah plenty of time to construct the mask she'd wear for the next 12 hours. Smile. Be pleasant. Swallow the rudeness, the condescension, the wandering hands of men who thought a tip entitled them to more. Be grateful for the job, even when it ground her down to nothing, because losing it meant losing everything. But today, as she pushed through the diner's door and tied her apron, something felt different. Heavier. The morning shift manager, Bernie, a gruff 60-something man who'd owned this place for 3 decades, caught her eye and looked away too quickly. That wasn't like him. Bernie was straightforward, almost brutally so. "Everything okay?" Aaliyah asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the industrial-sized pot. Bernie grunted, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. "Got some complaints. Corporate stuff. Nothing you need to worry about yet." Yet. The word hung in the air like a threat. Complaints about what? Customer service. Someone said you were rude. He finally met her eyes, and she saw something there, conflict, maybe even sympathy. "I know it's bullshit, Aaliyah. You're one of my best. But I'm getting pressure from higher up." Higher up. The diner was part of a small chain, owned by some investment group that Aaliyah had never given much thought to. Faceless suits who cared about numbers, not people. "I'm never rude," she said quietly, feeling something cold settle in her chest. "I always give my best." "I know. Just watch yourself, okay? One more complaint and my hands are tied." She nodded, but the cold feeling didn't leave. It spread through her veins like ice water, pooling in her stomach. Someone was lying about her. Someone wanted her gone. But why? The morning rush was brutal, a blur of orders and demanding customers and coffee pots that needed constant refilling. Aaliyah moved through it on autopilot, her mind spinning with anxiety. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Couldn't afford to start over somewhere else, to lose even a week's worth of paychecks. Maya's tuition was due in 3 weeks. The hospital was already threatening to suspend treatment if they didn't make a payment. By noon, her feet were screaming and her smile felt painted on. She was refilling the napkin dispensers when the door chimed, announcing a new customer. She looked up out of habit, and her breath caught. Him. Alex. He looked the same as always, faded jeans that fit him just right, a plain gray t-shirt under a worn leather jacket, a baseball cap pulled low over dark hair that always looked slightly mussed, like he'd just run his fingers through it. At first glance, he was nothing special. Just another guy in his mid-30s, maybe a freelance writer or artist, someone scraping by in the gig economy like everyone else in the city. But Aaliyah had learned over the past 3 months that Alex wasn't like everyone else. There was something in his eyes, piercing blue and almost unsettling in their intensity, that suggested depths he never talked about. When he smiled, really smiled, it transformed his whole face, softening the sharp angles of his jaw and the aristocratic slope of his nose. He listened when people talked, actually listened, in a way that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. And he'd been coming to the diner at least 4 times a week for the past 12 weeks, always sitting in her section, always ordering black coffee and whatever pie was fresh that day. "Hey," he said, sliding onto his usual stool at the counter. His voice was low, cultured in a way that didn't quite match the struggling writer persona. "Rough morning." Aaliyah realized she'd been staring. She forced a smile, grabbed a coffee pot. Is it that obvious? You get this little crease right here when you're stressed. He tapped the space between his eyebrows. Noticed it a few weeks ago. The fact that he'd noticed, that he paid attention to details that small, sent a flutter through her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. She'd learned her lesson about men 2 years ago, when Marcus had shattered her trust with a coworker named Jessica and a series of lies that still made her stomach turn. Love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Trust was for people who hadn't been broken. Just one of those days, she said, pouring his coffee. The usual? Apple pie if you've got it. And maybe. He paused, studying her face. Maybe you could take your break? Sit with me for a minute. She should say no. She had tables to cover, side work to finish, a manager watching her for any sign of incompetence. But something in Alex's expression made her hesitate. Concern, genuine and unguarded, like he actually cared whether she was okay. 5 minutes, she heard herself say. She grabbed 2 slices of pie, apple for him and cherry for herself, and slid onto the stool beside him. The diner had hit its mid-afternoon lull, only a handful of customers scattered among the worn booths. For a moment, they just sat there, eating pie in comfortable silence. You want to talk about it? Alex asked finally. Not much to talk about. Job stress. Life stress. The usual American dream. She tried to sound light, joking, but her voice cracked on the last word. Alex set down his fork. Aaliyah. The way he said her name, soft and careful, like it mattered, made something in her chest tighten. She focused on her pie, on the too sweet cherry filling and the flaky crust that Bernie's wife made from scratch every morning. My sister's sick, she found herself saying. The words came out in a rush, like a dam breaking. Has been for months. They can't figure out what's wrong, not exactly. Autoimmune something. And the treatments, the specialists, the tests, it's bleeding us dry. I've got a second job lined up, night shifts at a convenience store, but even that won't be enough. They want $50,000 for this new treatment that might help. $50,000. I've got $1,200 in savings. She laughed, a bitter sound that didn't reach her eyes. I've thought about doing something crazy. Taking one of those predatory loans, the ones that trap you forever. But what choice do I have? Let her suffer? Let her die? Hey. Alex's hand covered hers on the counter, warm and solid. You're not going to let anything happen to her. And you're not alone, okay? You've got people who care about you. Do I? She wanted to ask. Her friends had drifted away over the years, unable to understand why she couldn't go out, couldn't take trips, couldn't do anything that didn't revolve around survival. Maya had her college crowd, but Aaliyah wouldn't burden her with the financial reality. And her family? Gone. All gone. Except maybe this man sitting beside her, this near stranger who'd somehow become the brightest part of her week. Which was pathetic, wasn't it? Pinning hope on a guy she barely knew, who probably had his own problems and didn't need hers added to the pile. Thank you, she whispered, not pulling her hand away. For listening. For being here. Always, Alex said, and something flickered across his face. Guilt? Pain? It was gone before she could name it. Her break ended too soon. She stood, clearing their plates, trying to ignore how cold her hand felt without his touch. Same time tomorrow? Wouldn't miss it. As she walked away, she didn't see the way Alex watched her, his jaw tight, his fingers clenched around his coffee mug. Didn't see the phone he pulled from his pocket, the text message that made his eyes go hard. We need to talk. Now. 3 months earlier, the scene had been so different it might as well have been another universe. The boardroom of Harrington Enterprises occupied the entire top floor of a gleaming skyscraper in downtown Chicago, all glass and steel and carefully curated power. The table was mahogany, the chairs Italian leather, the view a panorama of the city sprawling below like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Alexander Harrington sat at the head of that table, exactly where he belonged, exactly where he'd been groomed to be since birth. 35 years old and already worth more than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. His suit was Armani, his watch Patek Philippe, his entire existence a carefully constructed image of untouchable success. Sharp jaw, piercing blue eyes that could freeze or seduce depending on his mood, light skin that spoke of old money and older privilege. He'd inherited the Harrington empire at 30 when his father suffered a massive heart attack, leaving behind a sprawling portfolio of luxury hotels, fine dining chains, real estate holdings that spanned 3 continents. What his father hadn't left behind was respect. Theodore Harrington had built his fortune through ruthless tactics, backroom deals, and a personal life so scandalous it had destroyed Alexander's mother. Hidden affairs, illegitimate children rumors that never quite got confirmed, a marriage that was a prison his mother couldn't escape. She died 6 months after Theodore, and Alexander had always suspected it was a broken heart that killed her, not the cancer the doctors blamed. Now Alexander sat in his father's chair, commanding his father's empire, constantly trying to prove he was different, better, worthy of the throne without inheriting the sins. The acquisition targets for Q3, his CFO was saying, pulling up a presentation that cast blue light across the room. We've identified 17 properties that match our criteria. Underperforming but salvageable, prime locations, minimal competition. Alexander leaned forward, studying the slides. Hotels, mostly, a few restaurant chains. Standard fare. His attention snagged on one entry, Lakeside Diner, Southside location, part of a 3-restaurant chain that was hemorrhaging money. This one, he said, tapping the screen. Lakeside. What's the story? Prime real estate, terrible management. The owner's old school, resistant to modernization. Revenues down 30% over 5 years. We acquire, gut it, turn it into something upscale. Easy $1 million flip. Victoria Langford, seated to Alexander's right, leaned back in her chair with the casual elegance of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Ice blonde hair styled into a perfect chignon, sharp features that could have graced magazine covers if she'd been interested in that sort of attention. Designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was his vice president, his fiancée, his partner in every sense that mattered to the board. Except the sense that mattered to his heart, but that had never been part of the arrangement. Send someone to evaluate, Victoria said, her voice crisp. No point wasting time on a property that small. I'll go myself. The room went quiet. Victoria's eyes narrowed, just slightly. Excuse me. I want to see it in person. No filters, no reports. I want to understand what we're buying. Alexander. Victoria's tone held a warning. You're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. You don't do site visits to dingy diners. That's what we have people for. Then consider me eccentric. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. I'll go undercover. See how the place really operates, how the staff treats customers, what the potential is beyond the numbers. A week, maybe 2. Victoria remained seated as the others filed out, her gaze locked on him. When they were alone, she rose with liquid grace, moving to stand directly in front of him. What are you really doing? She asked. My job. No. You're running from something. Or to something. I know you, Alexander. This isn't about due diligence. She wasn't wrong. Alexander had spent the past year feeling increasingly suffocated by his life, by the gilded cage of expectations and arranged obligations. His engagement to Victoria had been negotiated like a merger because that's exactly what it was. Her family's political connections combined with his family's wealth, a dynasty that would dominate Chicago's elite for generations. Love had never been part of the equation. Respect, certainly. Compatibility in ambition, absolutely. But passion? Genuine connection? Those were fairy tales for people who hadn't been born into empires. I need to do this, he said quietly. Trust me. Victoria studied him for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her green eyes. Then she smiled, cold and perfect. Of course. I trust you completely, darling. The lie sat between them like a third presence, acknowledged by neither. 2 days later, Alexander Harrington ceased to exist. In his place was Alex, a freelance writer who'd hit a rough patch, wearing jeans from Target and a jacket from a thrift store, his expensive haircut grown out just enough to look slightly unkempt. He'd done his research, created a whole backstory, fake social media profiles, even rented a modest apartment in a working-class neighborhood to maintain the illusion. The diner looked worse in person than it had in the reports. Faded sign, cracked vinyl booths, the kind of place where dreams came to die over bottomless coffee and congealed hash browns. But when he pushed through the door that first morning, something unexpected happened. He saw her. Aaliyah was serving a table of construction workers, laughing at something one of them said, her smile transforming her entire face. She moved with practiced efficiency but also with grace, like even this mundane work couldn't diminish something essential about her. When she glanced up and caught him staring, her expression shifted to professional welcome, but there was a wariness there too, a guard that went up instantly. "Sit anywhere," she called out. "I'll be right with you." Alexander, Alex, chose a stool at the counter, giving himself an unobstructed view. He watched as she finished with the construction workers, as she paused to refill an elderly woman's tea without being asked, as she deflected a too familiar comment from a middle-aged man with practiced ease. When she finally made her way over, menu in hand, he found himself at a loss for words. Up close, she was even more striking. Those warm brown eyes, that bone structure, the way she held herself with dignity despite the grease-stained apron and exhaustion etched into her features. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Coffee. Black." He paused, then added, "What's good here?" Besides the obvious. A hint of a real smile. "You're asking me to recommend food from this place?" Bold. "You work here. You must eat here." Occupational hazard. But she was warming up, just slightly. "The pie's actually decent. Bernie's wife makes it fresh every morning. Apple's your safest bet." "Then I'll trust your expertise." Something in her expression shifted, became more curious. "You're not from around here." It wasn't a question. Alexander had spent weeks perfecting his cover, but apparently not well enough. That obvious. "You talk like someone trying not to sound educated. It's in the careful way you choose your words, like you're translating from something fancier." She shrugged. "Plus your jeans are too clean. Nobody around here has jeans that clean." He couldn't help it. He laughed, genuine and surprised. "Busted. I'm a writer. Or trying to be. Freelance articles, mostly. Moved here a few months ago, still figuring the city out. Chicago'll eat you alive if you're not careful." She poured his coffee with expert precision, no spills, no wasted movement. "But it'll also surprise you. There's good here, if you know where to look." "Is that why you stayed?" "The good." Her expression closed off, just like that, walls slamming back into place. "I stayed because I didn't have a choice. That's why most people stay anywhere." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him with his coffee and a growing certainty that he'd just made the most dangerous decision of his life. Because in that brief exchange, in the way she'd seen through his disguise and called him on it, in the vulnerability hidden beneath her defensive walls, he'd felt something. Something real, in a life built entirely on carefully maintained illusions. Over the next 3 months, Alex became a regular fixture at the diner. He came at least 4 times a week, always sitting in Aaliyah's section, always ordering coffee and pie and staying just long enough to talk. Their conversations started superficial, weather, city politics, harmless observations about the other customers. But gradually, carefully, they deepened. She told him about Maya, about raising her sister after their parents died, about the weight of being a surrogate mother at 16. She showed him pictures on her phone, Maya at her high school graduation, Maya's acceptance letter to Northwestern, Maya laughing at some inside joke. Pride and love radiated from every word, but also bone-deep exhaustion. "She wants to be a doctor," Aaliyah said one rainy afternoon, stirring sugar into her own coffee during a rare break they took together. "Can you imagine? My baby sister, Dr. Maya Thompson. I used to read her bedtime stories about princesses, and now she's taking organic chemistry." "You made that possible," Alex said quietly. "Everything you sacrificed, all those dreams you put aside, you gave her a chance." "Yeah, well, that's what family does." But there was something fragile in her voice, something that suggested the weight of that sacrifice was crushing her. He wanted to tell her the truth. Wanted to say that he could help, that $50,000 was nothing to him, that he could write a check right now and solve every financial problem she had. But he was trapped in his own lie, caught between the man he was pretending to be and the man he actually was. And increasingly, caught by feelings he had no business having. Because somewhere between the coffee refills and the late-night conversations, somewhere in the way she laughed at his bad jokes and listened to his fabricated struggles with the same empathy she showed everyone, Alexander Harrington had done the unthinkable. He'd fallen in love with Aaliyah Thompson. It was in the way his day felt incomplete if he didn't see her, the way her smile became the measuring stick for his happiness, the way he lay awake at night thinking about the curve of her neck and the sound of her laughter and what it would feel like to be someone she could trust completely. One night, after a particularly long shift, he walked her to the bus stop. It was raining, that soft Chicago drizzle that felt like the city crying, and he'd brought an umbrella. They shared it, standing closer than strictly necessary, her shoulder brushing his arm. "You don't have to wait with me," she said, but there was no conviction in it. "I know." The bus was late. They stood in comfortable silence, watching cars spray water onto empty sidewalks, the city settling into its late-night rhythm. "Can I ask you something?" Aaliyah said finally. "And you can tell me it's none of my business." "Shoot. Why are you really here? In Chicago, I mean. A guy like you, you're smart, obviously educated despite trying to hide it, and you've got this way about you that says you've seen more of the world than this neighborhood. So why slum it at a dying diner?" His heart stuttered. "Maybe I'm exactly where I want to be." She looked up at him, and in the glow of the streetlight, with rain misting her face, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Nobody wants to be at that diner, Alex. Not even me." "Maybe I'm there for the company," he said softly. Something flickered in her eyes, hope, fear, disbelief all tangled together. For a moment, he thought she might call him on his half-truth, might push until he cracked and confessed everything. But then her bus appeared, its lights cutting through the rain, and the moment shattered. "Good night, Alex," she whispered, and he watched her climb aboard, watched the bus carry her away into the wet darkness, feeling like he'd just lost something precious even though it had never really been his to lose. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that Victoria's private investigator had been following him for weeks. Every visit to the diner, every shared umbrella, every lingering glance, documented, photographed, catalogued. And Victoria Langford was nothing if not thorough in protecting her investments. The confrontation came 3 nights later, in the penthouse Alexander maintained downtown. He'd just returned from the diner, his mind still full of Aaliyah, when he found Victoria waiting in his living room. She'd let herself in with the key he'd given her months ago, a symbol of their engagement that now felt like a shackle. She was pouring scotch, 2 glasses, her movements precise. When she turned to face him, her smile was glacial. "We need to talk about your waitress." The world tilted. "What?" Aaliyah Thompson. 28, orphaned at 16, sister at Northwestern, crushing debt, and apparently, she handed him one of the scotch glasses. "The reason my fiancé has been lying to me for 3 months. Alexander's mind raced, calculating, trying to find the angle that would minimize the damage. "It's not what you think. Isn't it?" Victoria pulled out her phone, swiped through photos. Him and Aaliyah at the bus stop, sharing an umbrella. Him and Aaliyah in the diner, sitting close, her hand near his on the counter. Him and Aaliyah laughing about something, his expression open in a way it never was in the boardroom. These look remarkably like a man falling for someone who isn't his fiancée. "It's research. The acquisition. Don't insult my intelligence." Victoria's voice could have cut glass. "I've known you too long, Alexander. I've seen you negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking. And I've never, not once, seen you look at me the way you're looking at her in these photos." The truth of that statement hung between them, brutal and undeniable. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "End it. Fire her, buy out the diner, do whatever you need to do to remove her from your life. And we continue as planned, the engagement, the merger, the empire we're building together." "And if I refuse?" Victoria's smile was a weapon. "Then I'll destroy her. Publicly, thoroughly. Scandal, lawsuits, expose every secret she has. I have 40% of the board's loyalty, Alexander. They'll back me over you in a heartbeat, especially if I reveal the instability of a CEO who abandons his responsibilities to play house with a waitress. Your father's legacy would be nothing compared to the damage I could do. You don't own me." "No. But I own enough of your world to make you wish I did." She set down her glass, moved toward the door. "You have 1 week to decide. Choose wisely." She left him standing there, scotch untouched in his hand, the photographs of him and Aaliyah still glowing on her abandoned phone. He picked it up, swiped through them again, seeing what Victoria saw, a man transformed by love, vulnerable in ways that could be exploited, destroyed. His phone buzzed. A text from Aaliyah. Maya wants to meet you. Says she needs to vet the guy who's making her sister smile again. Saturday at the hospital? No pressure. Alexander stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. He should say no. Should end this now before anyone got hurt more than necessary. Should retreat back to his carefully controlled life and let Aaliyah fade into the category of might have been. Instead, he typed, I'd be honored. What time? Because he was his father's son after all. Selfish, destructive, willing to risk everything for something he wanted but shouldn't have. The hospital was a 15-minute drive from the diner, a sprawling complex that smelled like antiseptic and crushed dreams. Alexander had been in hospitals before, usually for charity galas or board meetings for healthcare acquisitions. But walking through the oncology wing with Aaliyah, watching her navigate the hallways with the exhausted familiarity of someone who'd spent too many hours here, he felt the institutional coldness in a way he never had before. Maya's room was at the end of the hall, private because Aaliyah had fought the insurance company tooth and nail for it. When they entered, Alexander's breath caught. Maya was small in the hospital bed, swallowed by wires and monitors, but her smile was radiant. She had Aaliyah's features, softer and younger, with a kind of innocence that hadn't been crushed by adult responsibilities. Her hair was covered by a bright yellow headscarf, and she was wearing pajamas covered in tiny stars. So you're the mysterious Alex, Maya said, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. My sister's been tight-lipped about you, which means you're either really special or really suspicious. Maya, Aaliyah warned, but there was affection in it. What? I'm bedridden, not dead. I get to interrogate anyone who makes my sister blush. Maya patted the bed beside her. Sit. Tell me everything. What do you do? Where are you from? What are your intentions with my sister? Alexander sat, painfully aware of Aaliyah hovering near the door, arms crossed but smiling. I'm a writer. Originally from the East Coast. And my intentions, he met Aaliyah's eyes, are entirely honorable. Boring. Try again. But Maya was grinning. What's your favorite book? If you say something pretentious, I'm kicking you out. They talked for an hour. Maya was sharp, funny, with the kind of intelligence that had clearly earned her place at Northwestern. She asked about his writing, his life, his opinions on everything from climate change to whether pineapple belonged on pizza. And through it all, Alexander felt something breaking apart inside him. This was what Aaliyah was fighting for. This brilliant, kind, dying girl who deserved every chance at life. The $50,000 that seemed insurmountable to them was pocket change to him. Less than he'd spent on Victoria's engagement ring, less than he dropped on a single bottle of wine at charity auctions. He could fix this. Right now, today, he could write a check and save Maya's life. But doing so would expose him, would shatter the fragile trust he'd built with Aaliyah, would reveal him as the liar he was. When visiting hours ended and they had to leave, Maya caught his hand. Take care of her, she said quietly, seriously. She's given up everything for me. She deserves someone who sees that, who values that. Are you that person? I'm trying to be, Alexander said, and it was the most honest thing he'd said in months. Outside, in the parking lot, Aaliyah leaned against his rental car, eyes closed. Thank you for that. For being so good with her. She liked you. I liked her too. She's remarkable. She is. Aaliyah's voice cracked. And I'm losing her. Every day, I watch her get a little weaker, a little more tired. The doctors say without the treatment, she's got maybe 6 months. With it, maybe years. Maybe a full life. But I don't know how to. She broke down, sobs racking her body, and Alexander pulled her into his arms without thinking. She buried her face in his chest, her tears soaking through his shirt, and he held her like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to earth. I've got you, he whispered into her hair. You're not alone. I promise, you're not alone. It was a promise he had no right to make, built on lies and omissions and a carefully constructed false identity. But in that moment, holding her as she shattered, he meant every word. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. Finally, he pulled it out, careful not to let Aaliyah see the screen. Victoria's texts came rapid-fire. Time's up. Choose now. Her or everything. And then the final one, Already made some calls. Should be interesting to see how long she keeps that job. Alexander's blood went cold. What's wrong? Aaliyah had pulled back, wiping her eyes, noticing his expression. Nothing. Work stuff. He forced a smile. Hey, I need to handle something tonight, but tomorrow? Let's do something. Not the diner, not the hospital. Something normal. I don't really do normal. Then let's fake it. Please. She studied him, searching for something in his face. Whatever she found must have reassured her, because she nodded. Okay. Tomorrow. He kissed her forehead, chaste and gentle, then watched her get into her car, a battered Honda that barely ran, held together by hope and duct tape. As she drove away, he pulled up Victoria's contact, his finger hovering over the call button. But before he could dial, another text came through. This one from Bernie, the diner's owner, in a group chat that included Aaliyah, got another complaint about customer service. Specific to Aaliyah. Meeting tomorrow morning before shift. Alexander's hands clenched around the phone. Victoria's retaliation had begun. That night, he barely slept. He lay in his king-sized bed in his empty penthouse, staring at the ceiling, weighing impossible choices. If he revealed himself, Aaliyah would feel betrayed, manipulated, lied to. She'd never forgive him for playing with her emotions while hiding behind a false identity. Their relationship, tentative and new and precious, would shatter. But if he stayed silent, Victoria would systematically destroy her. The complaints were just the beginning. Victoria had the resources, the connections, the sheer vindictive will to ruin Aaliyah's life, her job, her reputation, maybe even her ability to get another job anywhere in the city. Unless he could outmaneuver Victoria first. Alexander got up, paced to the window. Chicago sprawled below him, millions of lights representing millions of lives, all of them more authentic than his. Somewhere out there, Aaliyah was probably lying awake too, worrying about money and Maya and now this mysterious complaint against her. He could fix all of it. With one phone call, he could end Victoria's engagement, expose her schemes to the board, mobilize his legal team, and use his wealth to solve every problem Aaliyah faced. But doing so would prove Victoria right, that he was unstable, reckless, willing to burn his empire for a woman he barely knew. Except he did know her. In 3 months of conversations, he'd seen her strength, her sacrifice, her quiet dignity in the face of crushing circumstances. He knew the way she took her coffee, the way she worried her bottom lip when stressed, the way her eyes lit up when talking about Maya's future. He knew her in ways that mattered, even if she didn't know him at all. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a conversation from years ago. Love is a weakness, Alexander. The moment you care about someone more than you care about power, you've already lost. Maybe his father had been right. Or maybe his father had died alone and unmourned, his empire intact but his soul hollowed out, having never experienced anything real in his entire calculated existence. Alexander picked up his phone and started typing an email to his lawyer. If he was going to fight Victoria, he needed ammunition. Every shady deal she'd made, every corner she'd cut, every manipulation she'd orchestrated, he wanted it documented, ready to deploy. The sun was rising by the time he finished, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. In a few hours, Aaliyah would walk into that diner and face Bernie's interrogation. In a few hours, Alexander would have to decide whether to reveal himself or let her fight alone. He chose a third option. At 8 a.m. sharp, dressed in his Alex disguise, he walked into the diner. Bernie was behind the counter, his expression grim. Aaliyah stood in front of him, still in her jacket, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. "I don't understand," she was saying, her voice strained. "What exactly did this person claim I did?" Said you were dismissive, rude, slammed their plate down. Made them feel unwelcome. Bernie pulled out a formal written complaint. It's detailed. Specific times, specific incidents. But I didn't, Bernie. I've never slammed anything. You know me. I do. Which is why I'm giving you a warning instead of firing you outright. But Aaliyah, this is the third complaint in 2 weeks. 3. I can't ignore that. Alexander's jaw clenched. 3 complaints, all perfectly timed, all designed to build a case for termination. Can I see them? Aaliyah asked. The complaints? Maybe if I knew who. Anonymous. All 3. Bernie sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Look, I believe you. But corporate's breathing down my neck. One more incident, and I won't have a choice. You'll be done. Aaliyah nodded slowly, her face carefully blank. Understood. She turned to start her shift and froze when she saw Alex, standing by the door. For a moment, something vulnerable crossed her face, a need for comfort she couldn't quite hide. Then the mask slammed back into place. I'll take your section, she said to him, moving past like he was just another customer. The morning rush was torture. Alexander watched as Aaliyah moved through her tables with mechanical precision, her smile forced, her shoulders rigid with tension. Every interaction looked like it was costing her, like she was waiting for someone to accuse her of something, anything, to give Bernie the excuse to fire her. Around 10 a.m., it happened. A woman in her 40s, expensive handbag, designer sunglasses pushed up into her highlighted hair, slid into one of Aaliyah's booths. Alexander recognized the type immediately, professional plant, probably hired by Victoria's people to create a scene. He moved closer, pretending to be absorbed in his laptop, but actually watching every interaction. Aaliyah approached with her order pad. Good morning. What can I get you? Coffee. Black. And I want it hot, not lukewarm like last time. Of course. Any food. I'll decide when I see how the coffee is. Red flag. Alexander's instincts, honed by years of boardroom warfare, screamed warning. This woman was setting a trap. Aaliyah brought the coffee within 2 minutes. Alexander had timed it. Hot, fresh from the pot. She set it down carefully, professionally. There you go. I'll give you a minute with the menu. This is cold. I'm sorry. Aaliyah's voice remained steady. I just poured it from. Are you calling me a liar? The woman's voice rose, carrying across the diner. Other customers turned to look. First you give me attitude, now you're accusing me of lying? Ma'am, I didn't. I want to speak to the manager. Now. The woman stood, making a show of it. This is exactly the kind of service I've come to expect from this dump. Rude, incompetent. Bernie was already moving toward them, his face resigned, and Alexander saw the calculation happening in real time. This complaint, witnessed by multiple customers, on top of the previous 3, Aaliyah was finished. He was on his feet before he consciously decided to move. Excuse me, Alexander said, his voice cutting through the woman's theatrics. Something in his tone made everyone freeze. It was his boardroom voice, the one that commanded multi-million-dollar negotiations, stripped of its usual careful disguise. I've been sitting right here for the past 20 minutes. I watched this entire interaction. The woman's eyes narrowed. Who are you? A customer. And I watched that waitress pour your coffee from a fresh pot less than 3 minutes ago. I watched her set it down carefully. And I watched you wait until she turned her back before you complained it was cold. That's a lie. Is it? Alexander pulled out his phone, held it up. Because I recorded the whole thing. Fascinating how the steam is clearly visible in the video coming off your supposedly cold coffee. He hadn't actually recorded anything, but the bluff worked. The woman's face went white, then red. I don't have to listen to this. No, you don't. But I'm guessing whoever hired you to harass this waitress isn't going to be happy that you got caught. He turned to Bernie. You might want to ask this woman who's paying her to file false complaints. Because I've been coming here for 3 months, and I've never once seen Aaliyah be anything but professional. The diner had gone completely silent. Everyone was staring. Customers, staff, Bernie, Aaliyah. The woman grabbed her purse and fled, not even trying to maintain her act. Bernie stood there, processing. You recorded it? Every second. Alexander met his eyes, dared him to challenge it. I'd like to see that video. For my records. Of course. Alexander pulled up his photo album, started scrolling like he was looking for the file, giving himself time to think. He landed on a random video of traffic he'd taken weeks ago, held it so Bernie could see just enough to look plausible without being able to examine it closely. I'll email it to you. Bernie grunted, not quite convinced but not willing to push. Aaliyah, take your break. We'll talk about this later. She nodded mutely and walked toward the back room. Alexander followed, ignoring the curious stares. He found her in the storage room, surrounded by boxes of supplies, her hands braced against a shelf, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The mask had finally cracked completely. Aaliyah. She spun around, swiping at her tears, trying to rebuild the walls. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Why? Her voice broke. Why would you risk getting involved in my mess? You don't even know me, not really. We've just been, what? Friendly? And now you're lying for me, making up videos that don't exist. I know you. He stepped closer, careful, like approaching something wounded and wild. I know you work yourself to exhaustion for your sister. I know you dream about designing clothes, but hide your sketches like they're shameful secrets. I know you take your coffee with cream and sugar, but drink it black when money's tight because the add-ins cost extra. I know you're scared all the time, but you never let it stop you from doing what needs to be done. Alex. I know you're the strongest person I've ever met. And I know someone is targeting you, trying to destroy you, and I cannot, his voice cracked. I will not stand by and watch it happen. She stared at him, tears still streaming down her face, searching his expression for something. Who are you? Really? The question landed like a knife between his ribs. This was it. The moment he should come clean, should tell her everything and face the consequences. But his phone buzzed in his pocket, insistent. He pulled it out, Victoria calling. He declined it. She called again immediately. You need to take that, Aaliyah said, reading something in his face. It's not important. Alex. She wiped her eyes, pulled herself together with visible effort. Go. Handle your life. I've got mine under control. They both knew it was a lie, but he let her have it. Tonight. Let me take you to dinner. A real dinner, somewhere nice. Please. I can't afford. My treat. As an apology for making such a scene out there. A ghost of a smile. You probably just saved my job. You don't need to apologize. Then as a date. The word hung between them, loaded with everything they hadn't said. Aaliyah took a shaky breath. Okay. A date. Text me the address. He wanted to kiss her. Wanted to pull her close and promise her that everything would be okay, that he'd fix all of it, that she'd never have to worry about money or complaints or losing her job ever again. Instead, he squeezed her hand once and left her there among the boxes and broken dreams, knowing he was running out of time to decide who he wanted to be. Outside, he finally called Victoria back. She answered on the first ring. Enjoying playing hero? Call off your dogs. Why would I do that? You haven't ended things. In fact, from what I hear, you're taking her on a date tonight. How romantic. Alexander's blood went cold. How do you? I have eyes everywhere, darling. Did you really think you could outmaneuver me? Victoria's laugh was sharp. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go on your little date. You're going to tell her tonight that it's over, that you're leaving Chicago, whatever story you want to sell. And then you're going to come home and focus on what actually matters. Our engagement, our company, our future. And if I don't? Then tomorrow morning, Aaliyah gets fired. And by tomorrow afternoon, every restaurant, diner and cafe in Chicago will have her name flagged in their hiring systems as a problem employee. By tomorrow evening, her sister's hospital will suddenly discover billing errors that triple her debt. By tomorrow night. Enough. Alexander's voice was deadly quiet. You've made your point. Have I? Because you're still not listening. I don't make idle threats, Alexander. I make promises. End it tonight, or I end her entire life. She hung up. Alexander stood on the sidewalk outside the diner, Chicago's morning noise washing over him. Traffic, construction, the city's endless heartbeat. He'd spent his whole life in control, carefully managing every variable, every outcome. But now he was caught between two impossible choices, each one requiring him to destroy something essential. End it with Aaliyah, break her heart but keep her safe. Or reveal the truth, fight Victoria, and risk everything, his company, his reputation, and possibly Aaliyah's safety anyway if Victoria decided to burn it all down. His phone buzzed with a text from Aaliyah. Thank you. For everything. See you tonight. Another text, this one from his lawyer. dug into Victoria's deals, found irregularities. Call me ASAP. And finally, one from Maya, sent to the number Aaliyah must have given her. My sister really likes you. Please don't hurt her. She's been hurt enough. Alexander stared at the 3 messages, 3 different paths, 3 different versions of who he could be. The version his father raised, ruthless, self-preserving, willing to sacrifice anything for power. The version Victoria expected, compliant, controllable, willing to play the part. Or the version Aaliyah believed in, kind, genuine, someone who saw her as more than a transaction. He realized, standing there on the dirty Chicago sidewalk in his disguise and his lies, that he'd been asking himself the wrong question all along. It wasn't about what he wanted. It wasn't even about what was smart or strategic or likely to succeed. It was about who he wanted to be when he looked at himself in the mirror. His father had died with everything and no one. Alexander was tired of following that blueprint. He called his lawyer. Everything you found on Victoria, prepare it for board presentation. I want it ready by Monday. Alexander, this will be nuclear. I know. Do it anyway. Next, he called his CFO. The Lakeside Diner acquisition? Halt it. Permanently. I want that property protected from any Harrington Enterprises involvement. Sir, the board will. Let me worry about the board. Finally, he opened a text to Victoria. You're right. I choose. Meet me at the office Monday morning. Bring your lawyer. You're going to need one. He pocketed the phone, feeling lighter and more terrified than he had in years. Because he just declared war on his fiancée, his vice president, and potentially his entire board. He just prioritized a woman he'd known for 3 months over an empire built across generations. His father would have called him a fool. His mother, he thought, might have called him brave. The day passed in a blur of preparation. Alexander returned to his penthouse, shed the Alex disguise, and became himself again. Armani suit, styled hair, the armor of wealth and power. He had 8 hours until dinner with Aaliyah, 8 hours to build a strategy that might save both his company and the woman he loved. Because that's what this was, he finally admitted to himself. Love. Messy, inconvenient, completely irrational love for a woman who knew him only as a lie but somehow saw him more clearly than anyone in his real life ever had. His lawyer arrived at 2 p.m. with boxes of documentation. This is everything. Victoria's been running side deals for years, taking kickbacks from contractors, steering acquisitions toward properties her family owns, even embezzling through creative accounting. It's all here. Enough to remove her from the board? Enough to put her in prison if you wanted to push it that far. Alexander stared at the documents. Proof of Victoria's corruption spread across his dining table. Using this would destroy her, yes. But it would also expose the company's vulnerabilities, potentially crater their stock, create a scandal that would take years to recover from. And Victoria would retaliate. She'd burn everything on her way down, including Aaliyah. Unless he could get her to back off first. He picked up his phone, dialed Victoria's number. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice smooth. Changed your mind already? Meet me. Now. My place. Darling, I'm in the middle of. Now, Victoria. Or I start making calls to every board member, every investor, every journalist who'd love to know about your little side projects. Silence. Then, 20 minutes. She arrived in 15, perfectly composed in a cream suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She swept into his penthouse like she owned it, which in a legal sense, she partially did. The engagement had come with shared assets, intertwined finances, the kind of merger that was designed to be unbreakable. Threatening me, Alexander? How unlike you. He gestured to the table, to the damning documents. How unlike you to be so sloppy. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes, not fear, but calculation. She picked up a folder, flipped through it casually. This proves nothing that a good lawyer couldn't dismiss as aggressive business practices. Maybe. But the optics? The scandal? The board's trust? Alexander moved to the window, hands in his pockets. You'd be finished, and you know it. As would you. As would the company. She set down the folder. You expose me, you expose us both. This isn't a chess move, darling. This is mutually assured destruction. Then let's make a deal. I'm listening. You leave Aaliyah alone. Completely. No more complaints, no more harassment, no interference in her life whatsoever. And in exchange, this, he gestured to the documents, stays between us. And the engagement remains intact. For now. We continue playing the happy couple for the board, for the public. But we both know what it really is, a business arrangement. Nothing more. Victoria studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. You're willing to stay engaged to me, to maintain this sham, just to protect her? Yes. That's either very noble or very stupid. I haven't decided which. She moved to pour herself a drink from his bar, taking her time. And what happens when she finds out who you really are? Because she will, eventually. These things always come out. I'll handle it. Will you? By lying to her indefinitely? By maintaining your little double life, playing struggling writer during the day and CEO by night? Victoria's smile was sharp. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak, Alexander. She'll hate you when she knows the truth. Maybe. But that's my choice to make, not yours. Victoria sipped her scotch, considering. Fine. I'll call off the harassment. But I have conditions. Of course you do. First, this relationship, or whatever it is, stays discreet. No public acknowledgement, no social media, nothing that could embarrass me or the company. Second, when it inevitably falls apart, you move on cleanly. No dramatics, no grand gestures. And third, she set down her glass, you owe me. When I need a favor, business or otherwise, you grant it. No questions asked. It was a devil's bargain, and they both knew it. But Alexander was out of options and out of time. Agreed. They shook hands like the business associates they'd always been, sealing a deal that felt more like a pact with darkness than a resolution. After Victoria left, Alexander showered, changed, tried to wash off the feeling of compromise that clung to his skin. He bought Aaliyah safety, but at the cost of deeper deception. She thought she was dating Alex, struggling writer. Instead, she'd be dating a man who just made backroom deals with his fiancée to keep her in the dark. His father's voice, love is weakness. His own voice, barely a whisper, maybe. But it's the only real thing I've ever felt. At 7 p.m., he drove to Aaliyah's apartment building, still in the Alex disguise, still playing the role. She was waiting outside, and the sight of her stole his breath. She'd dressed up. A simple black dress that hugged her curves, her hair loose around her shoulders, makeup that highlighted those incredible eyes. She looked nervous and excited and beautiful, and Alexander felt the full weight of what he was doing, building a relationship on a foundation of lies, no matter how well-intentioned. You look stunning, he said, opening the car door for her. You clean up pretty nice yourself. She slid into the passenger seat, then frowned. This is a nice car for a struggling freelance writer. Borrowed from a friend. Another lie. It was a rental, paid for with one of his personal credit cards, but even that was more than Alex should have been able to afford. The restaurant was in a trendy part of downtown, the kind of place with soft lighting and prix-fixe menus. Alexander had chosen it carefully, nice enough to show Aaliyah she deserved more than diners and hospital cafeterias, but not so ostentatious that it would raise questions about his cover story. They were seated at a corner table, intimate and quiet. Aaliyah looked around with poorly concealed wonder, and Alexander realized this was probably the nicest place she'd been in years. Alex, this is too much. I can't let you. You can. You deserve a night where you're not worried about money or Maya or work. Just one night where you can breathe. She smiled, soft and genuine. Thank you. They ordered wine, appetizers, entrees they'd never be able to finish. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, favorite books, dreams they'd given up and dreams they still held secret. Aaliyah told him about wanting to design clothes that made women feel powerful, about sketches she'd been drawing since high school. Alexander told her about wanting to write something meaningful, something that mattered beyond clicks and ad revenue. Half-truths and whole lies, but underneath it, something real. Can I ask you something? Aaliyah said over dessert. And you have to promise to tell me the truth. Alexander's heart stuttered. Of course. What do you see in me? Really? She wasn't fishing for compliments. Her expression was serious, vulnerable. You're smart, clearly educated, probably going places I can't even imagine. And I'm a waitress with a GED and more debt than hope. So why? Because, Alexander set down his fork, met her eyes. Because you're real. Everyone I've ever known wears masks, plays roles, says what they think they should say instead of what they actually mean. But you? You're genuine. You love fiercely, you sacrifice without expecting anything in return, you find beauty in small moments even when your world is falling apart. Being around you makes me want to be a better person. A real person. It was the most honest thing he'd said all night, even wrapped in the context of his lies. Tears glimmered in Aaliyah's eyes. I've been hurt before. Really badly. And I swore I wouldn't let anyone in again. But you make it so hard to keep those walls up. I would never hurt you, Alexander said, and even as the words left his mouth, he knew they might be the biggest lie of all. Because the truth would hurt her. When she learned who he really was, what he'd been hiding, it would devastate her. But that was future pain. Right now, in this moment, she was smiling at him like he'd hung the moon. I believe you, she whispered. They left the restaurant hand in hand, walking through downtown Chicago as the city lit up around them. Alexander had never felt more alive and more guilty in his life. They ended up at Millennium Park, sitting on a bench near the Bean, watching tourists take selfies and couples steal kisses. I wish I could freeze this moment, Aaliyah said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Just keep it forever, you know? Before reality comes crashing back in. Reality doesn't have to be a crash. Maybe it can be. Alexander trailed off, because he didn't know how to finish that sentence. Maybe it can be what? Based on truth? Not as long as he was lying. Built on trust? Not while he was hiding his entire identity. His phone buzzed. A text from Bernie, board meeting tomorrow. Corporate wants to discuss the location's future. Might be layoffs. Another from his CFO, Victoria called an emergency board session for Monday. She knows you're making a move. And finally, one from a hospital's billing department, forwarded by Aaliyah's contact, final notice, payment of $50,000 required by end of week or treatment will be suspended. The real world, crashing in right on schedule. I should get you home, Alexander said quietly. You have a shift tomorrow. The drive back to her apartment was quiet, comfortable, neither of them wanting to break the spell of the evening. When he pulled up outside her building, Aaliyah turned to him, her expression soft and open in a way he'd never seen before. Thank you for tonight. For everything. For seeing me. Always, he said, and then because he couldn't help himself, because it might be his only chance before everything fell apart, he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. But then Aaliyah's hand came up to cup his face, and the kiss deepened, became something desperate and real and perfect. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. I'm falling for you, she whispered. I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I am. I'm already gone, Alexander said, and it was the truest thing he'd said all night. She smiled, kissed him once more, and then slipped out of the car. He watched her walk into her building, watched the light turn on in her apartment window, watched until he was sure she was safe. Then he drove back to his penthouse, shed the Alex disguise, and became Alexander Harrington again. He poured himself a drink he didn't want and stared at the Chicago skyline, knowing that in less than 48 hours, he'd have to face the board, face Victoria, and potentially face the collapse of everything he built. His phone rang. Maya's number. The real world was crashing in, just like it always did. Alexander had one night of honesty with Aaliyah, one perfect moment where the lies almost didn't matter. But across town, Maya was making a decision that would shatter everything. A decision born from love and sacrifice. A decision that would force Alexander to choose between his carefully constructed disguise and the woman he'd come to love more than his own life. What happens when Maya gives up? When the hospital sends that final notice? And what will Alexander do when the truth comes knocking at his door in ways he never expected? If you're hooked on this story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you would do in Alexander's position. Would you come clean? Or keep the lie going? Part 2 is dropping next, and trust me, you do not want to miss what happens when everything Alexander has been hiding comes crashing down in the most devastating way possible. I'll see you there.